Zacchaeus, when Zacchaeus comes out of a sycamore tree, has lunch with Jesus and said, listen, I know I have stolen money from others, but I'm telling you, as I step into the light and receive salvation, I'm going to pay back every person that I've stolen from 4 times the amount of money that I took from them. We see this when Jesus was with the disciples, and these guys went from fishermen and tax collectors to being the apostles that Jesus spent time with and told about the good news of Jesus Christ, the gospel message. Not too long ago, Gina and I went down to Jamaica and we had a snorkeling trip. And I don't know if you've ever snorkeled in the Caribbean, but it's a pretty cool thing when you see the reefs and you see the fish and all the life that's underneath in the ocean. And I was swimming there with my snorkel and fins and my mask, and it was pretty cool. And then all of a sudden something happened that just transformed everything. I mean, the sun came out from behind the cloud, and all of a sudden these colors were so brilliant, and it was magnificent, and I saw things that I hadn't seen before. And listen, that's what happens in our lives when we step into the light of Christ. The light of Christ is what makes us the person and the people that we never realized that we were created to be. Yeah. The awesome thing is this light that Jesus provides is available for every one of us if we choose to step into it, and it speaks to the core of our soul. Psalm 27, David didn't say the Lord is a light. He said the Lord is my light and my salvation. Even though Jesus is the light of the world, he comes near to us and makes it personal to each and every one of us. Just because we are aware of the light, though, doesn't mean that we've chosen to walk in the light, to live in the light. But just like the grass of the ground, just like the seeds of the field, if we don't have the light of Christ in our lives, we will never be healthy. We will never grow in Him. Light doesn't just allow us to see, right? Light from the sun gives us life, and the light of Christ gives us life spiritually. In fact, studies involving light have shown that the light that comes, the light that we experience in our lives, even the visual light around us, the light of the sun, allows us to, there's less activity in that compartment of the brain, the fear factor in our brain. And there's also, of course, a lot of light and nourishment that comes from the sun. Nobody has to tell us that we don't get enough sunlight in the state of Michigan, and that's why some of us have to take those pills that have a little extra vitamin D in them, right? Because there's a lot of studies that have shown that depression and anxiety can set in if people don't experience enough light. From that perspective, again, David writes these words, the Lord is not only my light, but He's my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Darkness can cause some incredible fear. I mean, who wants to step into a dark room that you've never been in before without a light to turn on? And we just take it for granted. Listen, there's got to be a light switch around here somewhere, right? Because I'm not going to take another step forward until I have some light on in here. Even in a room that we haven't been in before, I'm telling you, there's things that can go on in our mind that we get paranoid about if we're in darkness for too long in a place that we're not familiar with. There is actually a name for that called Gasfeld effect. The Gasfeld effect, in 1930, there was a psychologist by the name of Wolfgang Metzger, and his research found that if you place someone in a dark room for any length of time, they will begin to hallucinate. They will begin to see things that aren't really there. And during this hallucination, Metzger found the wave patterns of the brain actually change. And he claims the reason for all of this happening is that the brain searches for missing sensory stimuli, and the result is amplified neural noise. Well, what does that really mean? That means that if you don't feed the brain with visual information that it's used to, it starts to fill in the gaps to the point that our brain can't distinguish the difference between reality and possibility. The same thing happens with us when we close our eyes at night and we find ourselves in that deep sleep and we begin to dream, right? And we experience things and we see things and we wake up from things that are going, that's just wrong. This is not right. I don't understand why that just happened. And, but that's a reality of our lives when we're in darkness for such a long period of time. As your mind played tricks on you in the dark, in the night. I always remember as a kid when I would turn off all the lights, I used to think, well, that's when the boogeyman comes out, right? And so literally as a child, when I would be on the other end of the house and all my family had gone to sleep, I would make sure I would turn on the light in front of me before I turn off the light behind me. Most people would say so that you could see where you're going. I would say no, because I don't want the monsters to get me at night. And I did that all the way till I got to my reading light above my bed, so I turned that on before I turn off my bedroom light. Do you think I actually read at night? No. It's the monsters. I'm telling you, some of you can maybe relate to that, but it messes with your head. What's that?
They were at his house too.
Yeah, see, I'm telling you. It seems like a reality. The fear of the dark is really the fear of the unknown. And what we don't realize is some of that paranoia and some of that fear of the unknown can bleed over into the other areas of our lives as well, right? When we find ourselves in a doctor's office and we've been called in to say, hey, listen, I need to have a conversation with you. And we're sitting there and we're listening to the doctor and he's telling us stuff that we don't quite understand. What happens? Oftentimes stuff kind of wells up within us and that fear begins to grip us if we're not careful. Maybe it's wondering how we're going to be able to work through some of those failures that we've experienced, some of those challenges that are in front of us, some of those addictive behaviors that we just can't seem to get behind us. Maybe it's a fear of the future and we're not sure what path we're supposed to take next. It could be anything, and if we're not careful, those things that are in our head will begin to affect our hearts, because the absence of certainty is terrifying, and the fear rains down gloriously on our lives in the darkness if we're not careful. And we're so good at taking possibilities of things that haven't even happened yet and turning it into personal realities just because there's this fear that becomes also real in our lives and this darkness that's all around us. And if we're not careful, it will diminish our faith and it will zap the hope out of our heart. And at that point, if we find ourselves in that place, we tend to lose center of where God is, and it will rock the foundation of our world. But I'm telling you, the good news is Jesus came.
Amen.
Jesus came to eradicate all of that. And when he came into the darkness of the night, but the dawn showed up. And Jesus didn't just bring the light while he was here on this earth. He brought it to the whole world from generation to generation through your life and mine as we continue to proclaim the hope of Jesus Christ. And with that light, it's not only faith above fear, but it's peace, it's joy, it's hope, it's purpose, it's love that goes from everlasting to everlasting. The light of Christ changes our reality, it changes our heart, it puts a peace into the foundation of our soul. Just the next couple verses as we finish up this morning says, what David writes, when the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall. Though an enemy besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war breaks out against me, even then I will be confident. We're not exactly sure when these words were penned by David, but we know at that point he had lost his mom, he had lost his dad. We know that he was being chased down. We know that the enemy was looming around him. We know people were saying false things about him, and people were coming after him. He had plenty to be afraid of, and he had every excuse to have fear in his heart. Fear was a reality for David. And now there are two kinds of fears. There's the illegitimate fear that we talk about, where things go bump in the night, or those things that are known about us. But David experienced a legitimate fear when he could be hiding in the mountains in the darkness of the night, and he could look down and he could see campfires of enemies that were trying to find him to come and to kill him. That's a reality that David was experiencing when he wrote these words. And faith may live in the neighborhood of fear, but it doesn't abide by the same rules. Now, faith doesn't eliminate the fear. It just helps us to focus less on the fear and helps us to focus more on the Father and what God is capable of doing in our lives. But it has to come down to a factor of trust. And we know that we can trust God because He's the one who created us. He's the one who has our best interest in mind. He's the one who loved us even before we loved Him. It's God who can help us to overcome these anxieties. And here's the thing. God doesn't just push those things, those fears away from us. He doesn't just eliminate the problems, but He gives us what we need to walk through those dark, difficult times. David wrote, even when I walk through the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. He does it by giving us this inner peace, this peace that passes understanding, to look beyond the here and now and recognize that there are better things ahead. He does it by bringing people like you around our lives to help encourage us, to help carry one another's burdens. He does it by the power and the presence of His Spirit that gives us a confidence and a hope to persevere, that God is still in control. It's not our limiting ability, it's God's capability. God does it by helping us to rise above the powers, the principalities of this dark world. The same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead raises us up with Christ above those things that would try to pull us down. He does it by the light of Christ that exposes our fear, the light of Christ that eliminates our fear. And when those real fears set in, that's when we focus on the Father. Because greater is He that is in us than he that is in the world.
Amen.
It's the light of Christ within us that helps us to overcome our fears. When fears get into our mind, it messes with us and it causes us not to hear it. It keeps us from focusing on what God has planned for our lives, and it keeps us down and makes us struggle. That's why the reality is we need to step into God so that our faith rises above our fear. To say, God, I'm going to trust You. I'm going to trust You now, even though the circumstances may look exactly the same, even though nothing has changed. I know that You are able to deliver me from these difficulties. We close with this invitation of Jesus out of Matthew 11:28, and He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." God doesn't want any of us to experience fear. He doesn't want us to have anxiety. He doesn't want us to have stress that we find ourselves in. It's an invitation. And when we focus on our Father, our burdens become lighter. Our foothold becomes sure. Our heart begins to fill with something that is a peace that passes understanding, and our fear becomes less because our faith is elevated above our fears. Would you stand with me, please, as we close in prayer this morning? So God, we thank you. We thank you for the encouragement that comes through your Son, Jesus Christ, a babe that was born in Bethlehem. And man, too often it's easy for us to just get caught up in the American church culture that has this celebration of the lights on a tree and even the candles that are lit during a season of Advent. And we think, yeah, Jesus came so that he could come again. But when Jesus came, he brought with him things from the kingdom that transform our lives here and now, if we'll only allow the power of God to grip our heart and to grab a hold of our lives and to transform us from the inside out, the peace that can stabilize us, the joy that's unspeakable, that strengthens us, the power of God that leads us, the hope that guides us and reminds us that we can move forward, we can persevere like Bunny did through all the surgeries, like the Sanfords did for years, getting their house rebuilt. And those are just some physical, material things, but we know internally there are things that we struggle with. God, help us to hold on to you. Help us to be reminded that you are in control, that you have the purpose and the plan that you have set before us from the time of creation for the good of mankind, so that you could work through us, that you have created us with purpose, with gifts, with talents and temperaments and things that you want us to accomplish. But we can never do it if we're facing the fears and the struggles and the stress that pull us down, God. We know that's not a quick fix. And we know that's why we are making ourselves available to come alongside others that are struggling, God, that we can be that light and that hope. In the hands and feet of Christ that offers a hug, that offers a smile, that offers a handshake. It says, I'm with you. I'm in this with you. God, help us to step out and be those people that you're calling us to be. Thank you that this is a group of people that says, I want to be there. I want to do this. I want to make a difference. I don't want to just get through the holiday season. I want something to be accomplished that's kingdom-mindedness, that has purpose that goes beyond myself. God, it's together when we can glorify you, and your light is shining in a brilliant way so that others will see that and dance in the street and celebrate the freedom that comes from experiencing Jesus Christ in our lives today. Thank you, God, that you continue to call us, that you continue to pursue us, that you continue to invite us to come just as we are and witness the glory of God that transforms our lives. For all that you have done, for all that you're doing and promise to do, we give you honor and glory and praise. And all God's people said, Amen.